simple, charming, and downright cute. There are very few RPGs that really capture that whimsy and imagination of a child, quite like Madou Monogatari, Hanamaru Dai Youchienji. Brought to us from the fine folks at Compile, mostly known for their Puyo Puyo games, and their onslaught of amazing shmups that have seemingly found themselves amongst piles of diamonds. This wacky RPG is based on the former, and sits amongst the likes of Final Fantasy Mystic Quest as an enjoyable beginner's RPG worth your time. In this game, you play as Arle, an aspiring soon-to-be graduate of magical kindergarten. But it seems that's becoming a little too much for her, as when she gets word of 7 sacred jewels that will grant her any wish, she sets off on a wonderful journey to find them so she can get her graduation certificate. As I said, Madou Monogatari delicately captures the essence of a childhood treasure hunt. So much so that some of the main villains in the game are just the local delinquents. Also, the game's short length really lends itself to the plausibility that these are in fact a series of long afternoon childlike adventures. With Madou Monogatari's multitude of wondrous happenings, you'll find yourself roaming around a slightly smaller world than one might expect, but it's still packed to the brim with sights to see and places to go, like the Wolf Village with its imposter you'll have to sniff out, the Forest of Darkness whose crystal needs to be returned, or the royal family tomb that you'll have to scour in order to calm an angry deity. But of course, we're here to collect those gems. And acquiring these secret jewels is carried out in quite a varied manner. Anything from dogging on this harpy for failing her American Idol audition, defeating a weird, angry leg monster for a village of frogs, yeah, that happens, or simply befriending Satan, which I swear is more endearing than it sounds. Regardless, the game's wacky and inventive scenarios only add to its charm, which the game has plenty of. Little details like Arle not being able to read so well at the start of the game, or her staggering herself when she runs into a wall at full force, Satan being a bit of a narcissist as he has his own fan club, and the many bits of quirky dialogue exchanged before each battle really go a long way into creating a funny little world for this odd tale to take place in. And this might be the only RPG where you don't simply burst into strangers' houses as Arle actually decides to knock before entering. Also, how is it you fast travel in this game? A train? A boat? Maybe an airship? How about a giant flying squirrel? Now that's what I call charming. While Madou Monogatari is a traditional RPG through and through, it does try its hand at breaking away from some of the key features found throughout the genre. For example, life, MP meters, and even status bars are intentionally left absent. In place of said features are visual and text-based representations that you'll have to go off of. When Arle is close to full health, she will happily dance and sway back and forth during battles. She'll even mention how great she feels and how much magic she has left. And this sometimes leads to some unintentionally funny moments, like taking a massive blow from an enemy, and Arle simply shaking it off, stating, "I feel great." However, when she isn't feeling too hot, she'll sport a swollen eye and fatigued look. This same concept carries over to your EXP meter, which takes on the form of these 8 green gems that line your HUD. Once all 8 are filled, Arle will of course level up. Like in most RPGs, this will increase your stats like health and defense, but not so much your attacks. As a matter of fact, your spells are leveled up and even acquired by finding these plaques throughout the game, and you don't want to miss these or else you'll have a real tough time. So maybe follow a guide, as if you are somewhat well hidden like the Jugum spell, that I regrettably went without for most of the game. For an RPG, the game does feel a bit barren at times. On more than one occasion I found myself trekking through an area that in any other RPG would have been riddled with random encounters. But here I found them surprisingly absent, to the point that I wasn't sure how much combat would actually be in the game. But as you soon find out, combat is strictly tied to dungeons, which isn't a bad thing as traversing the overworld isn't a meandering process of constantly running into low-tier baddies. It's a welcome change, because you do spend a fair amount of time heading from one place to another. But this lack of battles did leave me needing to occasionally grind a level when I'd get to the next dungeon, only to find myself getting curb stomped by the world's most adorable non-threatening foes. But in the end, the amount of grind time needed is very, very minimal. With backtracking in mind, this game does take a page from Earthbound by allowing you to auto-win against weak foes when making your way through previous areas. To do this, you must hold down the L and R buttons when an encounter is triggered. But if you can't skip the battles, you're met with a fairly standard combat system. Since you are in fact a magical little girl, it should come as no surprise that your combat is all spell-based, and Arle has 3 main forms of damage dealing: fire, ice, and lightning, each of which will have their advantages and disadvantages against certain enemies, so make sure you give each a whirl to figure out who's weak against what. On top of those spells, you also have a small arsenal of status effects like Sleep or Confusion, and other nifty spells like daiyōchienji that temporarily powers up your spellcasting, and the always handy healing spell. Do be wary of what and how much you cast, as you can run out of MP, but in a smart design choice, your 3 primary attacks don't drain magic points, so you'll never find yourself without a means of attack. Not to mention there are items that can restore MP and HP. The tunes that backdrop this game are about what you'd expect. Plenty of upbeat and playful rhythms and melodies find their way dancing through your head as you hike across the overworld in search of your next gem. Quite a number of them are playfully infectious with their well-composed horn and string arrangements. A personal favorite worth mentioning is the Fairy Garden theme, as it's just so mystical and calming. I love it. There is a decent variety as well, as a few slower and moodier tunes crop up for boss battles and foreboding areas. In short, it's the perfect OST to accompany this game. Madou Monogatari, despite being a simple and short RPG, has a good bit going for it, with its fun battles, cute and charming characters, and overall nifty adventure. I mean, how can you not love the adorable Arle constantly waving at you from the HUD? And while I do have my gripes with the game, like the rather repetitive and maze-like dungeons, seriously, you'll see this screen countless times in the game. The lack of any kind of labels in the menus, and the battle sets certainly start to drag on in the late game, I can't say that any of these really hindered my overall experience. And with that, Madou Monogatari comes highly recommended for those of you who prefer a more casual RPG experience like myself. As for veteran RPG players, this one gets a mild suggestion, if only for it being an interesting curiosity that never found its way to our side of the pond. As far as getting your hands on a hard copy goes, it seems the game will fetch you anywhere from $15 to $80 loose, complete in box, or for a fan-translated repro. So if a physical copy is what you desire, expect to pay somewhere in that ballpark. But how can you pass up a boxed copy with an amazing cover like that? Anyways, if you don't mind a simple and silly little RPG to bide your time for a few hours, then give Madou Monogatari a shot. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, consider checking out these other videos right here, or even subscribing. Also, if you'd like to throw me a couple of bucks, you can support the show on Patreon.